If this car isn't successful, it will be the end of Alfa Romeo. But that pressure on Alfa Romeo to make sure this car is a big hit is actually a very good thing for buyers of crossovers, because it means the brand's had to pull out all the stops in ensuring the Junior stands out in a very busy class. Now, Alfa Romeo knows that you know that this is just a Peugeot E-2008 underneath, or is it? Because the Veloce, the top model, is very different, and you'll have to watch our video after this one of that car to see how significant the changes are. So we're going to test whether this more affordable Speciale trim still has enough changes to differentiate it from those close rivals, and we're also going to test whether it's practical enough, whether it's spacious enough, and of course whether it has enough range to be the sporty, small family car of choice in the electric car world.
I mean, I absolutely loved the top grade Junior Veloce when I drove it on track in Italy last year.
Wow, it has some grip. But this is the lower grade Speciale, and I'm testing it in rainy old England. So I want to find out, does any of that special racy handling trickle down into this model, or is it hit and miss like trickle down economics? As far as the bodywork is concerned, this Speciale looks near identical to the Veloce. It's only when you get closer and look at the wheels that you spot that we now have 18-inch alloys versus the other cars 20s, and we don't have the massive brake calipers either. But the bodywork overall, it looks identical, and that's a very good thing, and that's to the millimeter as well, apart from when you consider height, because this car actually does have 25 millimeters more of suspension travel, which should give it a better ride. But in terms of design, well, proof of the pudding is the fact that our Speciale even gets the Veloce's optional black roof. And it's the same around the back as well. Look, we've got the same pinched tail, which is inspired by the iconic Alfa TZ, and we've also got lots of black plastic. But Alfa says that it won't fade like a 25-year-old Ford Ka because it's made of special ingredients, and I can show you them up close in detail. If you look at this shot here, which we filmed under studio lights, and it emphasizes how this black plastic looks more expensive than your usual stuff.
Overall, I think it's fair to say this Junior Speciale still looks different enough on the outside to stand out from the similarly priced Peugeot 2008. But what about inside?
Well, it absolutely is different enough, because Alfa Romeo has sprinkled so many changes onto this cabin, and also it's thrown a lot of Alfa Romeo badges across it as well, and I'll show you those as we talk through it. Now, the key changes versus, for example, the Peugeot, are the fact that we've got these very different infotainment screen setups. I think the screens themselves maybe are shared, but actually the way they sit in the dash is very different. The instrument cluster ahead of me has these really aggressive Alfa Romeo binnacles. It makes and harks back to the old rev counters of the iconic Alfas of yesteryear, and this screen over here is angled quite substantially towards the driver, and it sits above some buttons for your climate control, so it's tactile and easy to use. The system itself isn't the most intuitive, but you do get used to it, and also it comes as standard with wireless CarPlay and Android Auto to go with the wireless charging mat we've got down there. You've also got a couple of USB ports as well, so it's a functional, nice interior, but the fit and finish and also the design are what elevate it above those other cars. The materials as well are quite good. They are plastic, but they're soft touch in most of the important places. And I have to give a shout out to these vents. I love them. I think they look really cool. They've got the Alfa Romeo logo in them, and they've got this illumination as well in red to go with the illumination elsewhere on the dash. You also get a decent amount of storage space. We've got 3 cup holders down here, but they can also be removed so it just becomes storage room, and you've also got an okay amount of storage space down there, which somewhat makes up for the laughably small glove box which we have. I don't know what you're going to get in there. Barely an ice scraper, I reckon. Tiny. But overall, this is a nice cabin, and you've got Alfa Romeo badges to remind you you're not in a Peugeot. You've got one obviously on the steering wheel, on those vents, even on the headrests as well, and they've even thrown them on the wireless charging mat. And if you open the doors, there are badges there as well. But there is one crucial difference compared to that Veloce, and that is the seats, because we don't get those racy sabelt chairs. Instead, we get these, well, very normal looking ones. They do come with one key advantage though, and also one disadvantage. The advantage is that they're slightly less pinched on you, so potentially actually more comfortable for more body shapes. And also in this Speciale car, we've also got massage function as well. So they're actually nice and supportive, and on a long drive, they're very comfortable. But there is one small disadvantage, and I'm gonna have to jump in the back to show you it. These thicker chairs actually impede on my knee space compared to the Veloce with its sabelt seats. Those optional seats were thinner in the back, and they were actually cut in, so it meant my knees had a bit of space. But in this case, well, they're basically permanently touching the fabric ahead of them. I've got okay leg room and okay foot room, but my knees are a bit squashed. Although you do gain one thing, and that actually makes up for a problem. So the thing you gain is this pocket down here, which you definitely didn't have in the Veloce. And that makes up for the fact that you don't get any door bins in the back of a Junior, no matter what model you go for. And that will be true also for the incoming Ibrida hybrid model, which we're going to drive next year. So make sure you're subscribed for that. That car might also, we hope, get a little bit more foot room as well, because there won't be batteries in the floor. So potentially it'll be more spacious. Certainly it's going to sell better than this electric car, and that's going to be a problem for Alfa Romeo, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. But otherwise it should be pretty much the same, because in the back of a Junior there's not that much to talk about. I mean, you've only got one USB-C port and you don't have a fold down armrest in the middle seat here either. So the back is quite light on practicality, and that's doubly true if you have 3 people in the back as well, because this is not a bespoke EV platform, so there's a lump in the floor, which means the middle seat passenger, if you have one, is going to have to straddle that annoying feature in the floor. I mean, you can technically get 3 teenagers in here, but really this is a much better space for very small kids. I mean, the Isofix bar couldn't be an easier reach. Now, we haven't spoken about the price of this Junior yet, but it's really important because it's actually cheaper than the equivalent Peugeot E-2008. And you might be thinking, how have they done that? Because it's lovely, and also it's got a standard fit electric tailgate. But then you realize the boot is actually about 10% smaller than that Peugeot's. So it's definitely not as practical overall, although you'd be hard pressed to find where that space has been lost, not least because it looks quite good here, and also you've got 2 floor stages, and you can even remove the floor entirely to reveal a space where I've put some hastily thrown in charge cables. I have to admit, I'd much prefer to have the front boot that we had on the Veloce, but that is an optional extra, albeit one that's well worth going for. But even if you don't, I can demonstrate how useful this boot is. Look at Jamil's cabin aeroplane bag. It squeezes on here, no problems whatsoever. And I reckon you can get 4 of these side by side, and you can even close the boot lid. We've tried. Oh. And if you need more room, well, you can fold down those back seats in a 60/40 configuration. So it's good, it's practical, it's middle of the road for this class. Although, just as important in an Alfa Romeo is how it drives. Now, before I tell you what I think about this car on the road, it's worth me mentioning that if you want to see whether this or the E-2008 are better suited to your life, you can actually come down to a Cinch store and go for a test drive yourself, and also look around the car. Of course, if you want to check out all the other cars we have, you can also download our very helpful app, where you can save loads of money on nearly new cars. Now, the crucial thing to remember is that this Speciale trim is 7 grand cheaper than the Veloce that I loved. So what I want to know is, does it feel like it's 7 grand less expensive? You know what, initially it doesn't, because the fit and finish of the cabin and the way the car rolls down a road is nigh on identical. So I am really feeling like this is a high quality car, and that is key to address the problem I'm going to tell you about in a little bit. It's got less power, we're over 100 horsepower down on what that Veloce was, but we've still got nice electric acceleration. It's still plenty nippy enough for getting onto a motorway or darting around town, and even cruising down a country road. But where you really feel the difference, especially if you love driving in a real pure sense, is the way the car steers. That Veloce was really pointy, felt like a little hot hatch in the way it went around corners, whereas this, while it definitely enjoys going around bends and doesn't feel in any way out of its place going around corners with a bit of pace, it definitely doesn't feel anywhere near as eager and overly sporting. Instead, it's just composed, it's got tons of grip, and actually, it's pretty no fuss when it goes around bends. You can carry pace along a country road, be efficient in your driving, and the car feels completely fine with it. It's still got some of that really nicely judged Alfa Romeo finesse as well. The steering is very light, but it's nice and direct. The brakes are nice and progressive in the way they feel. You don't have a snatchy, grabby brake like you have in other cars. It's very easy to be smooth and sensible in this car, but it's also easy to drive well, even when you pick up the pace. There is one area where you notice a big difference from the Peugeot E-2008, and that E-2008, by the way, has a really high standard when it comes to ride. And in this Alfa Romeo, in order to make it feel like an Alfa Romeo, to make it feel as composed as it does through the bends, they definitely have had to turn up the stiffness of the suspension. This is definitely not the firmest car in this class. There is a Ford Puma ST that will jiggle you around a little bit more than this will, but if comfort is your priority, and especially if you're doing a school run in town or you're driving over speed humps very often, this is definitely a more fidgety car than the Peugeot and other softer riding machines, including the Citroën EC3. On the motorway, it really smooths out bumps and cracks and even some of the potholes, and on these country roads as well. While it is fidgety, it is nice and high quality in its damping.
The Junior Speciale feels like an EV that's well suited to drives on the motorway, and with a claimed 255-mile range, you could feasibly manage a 50-mile motorway commute with just a couple of charges a week. But here's where the car feels a little conflicted, because in the rain and wind of a British winter, I wasn't able to get anything close to the Junior's claimed range when I was driving on the motorway, with even 200 miles feeling like a stretch. So as far as battery life is concerned, the Junior, like its Peugeot sibling, and to be frank, most EVs of this class, feels more at home in town.
As for driver assistance, you get all the same standard kit that you get on the top of the range E-2008. So it means it's actually really easy to drive this car in all road settings. On the motorway, you've got adaptive cruise control, which is actually very, very nice. It doesn't rush up to cars and then slam on the brakes. It's nice and smooth. It means you can just leave the car to do the long slog. And you do have 3 drive modes, which Alfa Romeo calls DNA. That stands for dynamic, for natural, and then advanced efficiency. But really, it's just normal, sport, and eco. And those modes do make a little bit of a difference. Eco does what it says on the tin, it just makes the car more slow to accelerate. Normal is, of course, very normal feeling, but sport does ramp up the acceleration of it. So much so, actually, that for 99% of people, it's not going to be worth going for that Veloce and its extra power, because this is plenty nippy enough. Earlier I mentioned that there were some serious problems for this car, and I'm going to tell you what they are now. Now, the first is that Alfa Romeo has to sell a ton of these Juniors in electric form in order to not be forced out of the market, thanks to the government's very controversial EV mandate. And well, do I think it can do that? Yeah, I do think it can do that. I think it's different enough from the rivals, and I think it offers enough Alfa Romeo specialness to stand out in the pack. But there is a problem in the shape of a hybrid Junior. Now, hybrids sell better than EVs at the moment in the UK, so for Alfa Romeo to ensure its EV mix is greater, launching a hybrid version of this car probably isn't going to help. And then there is another, even bigger problem on the horizon, and that comes in the shape of a Ford Puma Gen-E, because that car isn't just going to undercut the 2008, it's going to undercut this car as well for price, and by some margin as well. Those are big problems for this car to face. So next year, I think we're going to have to get this up against one of those to see which is actually better. But what I really miss in this Junior Speciale were the sweet upgrades you get in the Veloce model. And in this video here, I explain in detail and demonstrate why they make it one of the best electric driver's cars you can buy. And in this video here, I explain why I made the shortlist in our Car of the Year video.